Hello again. I'm Chef Benny and welcome back to Reheated History, the show where we make dishes that make you say, you put the juice in there too? Okay. As a history teacher, I'm always looking for new and delicious ways to connect with the past. What did the common medieval peasant eat? What fueled the Roman gladiator? Did colonial Americans have a favorite comfort food? The answers aren't in textbooks, they're in the kitchens, farms, and fire pits of history. So, each week we'll cook our way through time, one humble, hopefully hilarious, and surprisingly tasty dish at a time. Because the best way to understand history is with our stomachs. This is Reheated History. It's summer of 2026, and I don't know about you, but I've been complaining way too often about the price of Coke, coffee, chicken, and having 7 different streaming subscriptions, 4 of which we forgot we even signed up for. Today, we're going back to a time when people were counting pennies just to buy a single loaf of day-old bread. We are traveling back to the United States in the 1930s to look at the realities of living during the Great Depression. Today, we're cooking Hoover Stew. Now, this dish sits in my favorite, but unfortunately too common category of culinary history. It is a meal born out of absolute desperation, seasoned with a heavy dose of political commentary. Imagine being such an unpopular president that everyone names everything after you. To understand why this dish even exists, you have to understand the sheer psychological and cultural shock of the early 1930s. In October of 1929, the stock market crashed, and almost overnight, the American dream didn't just stumble, it fell off a cliff, tumbled down a hill, and exploded in an unrealistic ball of fire. By 1932, a staggering 1/4 of the American workforce was completely unemployed. That is roughly 13 million people suddenly wondering how to pay for breakfast. Keep in mind that there were no federal food stamps, there was no unemployment insurance, no FDIC, no Social Security, no modern safety nets as we know them today. If your savings vanished when the local bank collapsed, your financial backup plan was, good luck, bro. As tens of thousands of families lost their homes because they couldn't pay rent, they migrated towards major cities looking for work. While looking, they built massive, sprawling shanty towns out of scrap wood, cardboard, old fruit crates, and rusted sheet metal. And because the public widely blamed President Herbert Hoover for his hands-off, the market will fix itself approach to the economic crisis, the American people began naming their newfound poverty after him with a level of sarcasm that only Michael Bluth would understand. I mean, it's a banana. How much can it cost? $10? Before the crash, Hoover had campaigned in 1928 on the incredibly optimistic slogan, a chicken in every pot and a car in every garage. By 1932, the public twisted this brutally. Democrats ran mock campaign ads saying, sure, you have a car in your garage, but you're living in it, and you've hitched a horse to the front bumper because you can't afford a single gallon of gas. By the way, taking apart your car and putting together the parts into a cart pulled by a horse became a common sight on American roads, and they were called Hoover carts. The desolate shantytowns became known as Hoovervilles, and if you had to sleep on a park bench and cover yourself with an old newspapers to freeze a little less at night, you weren't using a blanket, you were sleeping under a Hoover blanket. If you walked around with your pockets completely turned inside out to show the world you were entirely broke, you were proudly flying a Hoover flag. In all fairness, Hoover wasn't actually this cartoon supervillain. And sure, it looks bad when everything's going to hell and you're just tossing your hands in the air saying it's going to get better because it can't possibly get worse, right? Unfortunately, behind the scenes, he was completely paralyzed by his own philosophy from a weirdly specific traumatic experience. Years before he became president, Hoover had advised a close friend to buy a specific stock. The stock immediately crashed and completely ruined the man's finances. Hoover felt so deeply guilty about it that he secretly bought back the worthless stock from his friend using his own personal money to clear his conscience. And he vowed to never give financial advice again, which is fine, except as you can imagine, when you become president and the entire global economy desperately needs someone, anyone, to do something about it. And then you have the absolute political irony of prohibition. When the Depression hit, the government desperately needed tax revenue to fund relief programs. But because alcohol was illegal, which is one of the biggest money-making industries on the planet, it went entirely untaxed. So, criminals like Al Capone were making a literal fortune while the US Treasury was completely broke. Somehow, the most organized business model in America belonged to a guy who also murdered people. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt ran against Hoover in 1932, his winning platform wasn't just rigorous economic reform, it was a literal promise to bring back beer.
The decisive vote of the 36th state against prohibition is happy news for the grain raisers of the United States and for many others throughout the land. With an eye on December 5th, Work is being rushed in distilleries and bottling works. Thousands are being called back to work in plants of allied industries. At least 500,000 new jobs are predicted as the result of repeal.
The moment FDR legalized beer in 1933, the government instantly pulled in millions of tax dollars, proving that sometimes the solution to a broken economy is, quite literally, a beer. Now, when we think of economic crashes today, we usually think of inflation or even hyperinflation, like the Weimar Germany, where you needed a wheelbarrow full of cash just to buy a single loaf of bread. But the Great Depression in the US was actually a deflationary spiral, which is much weirder. Money didn't lose value. Money basically went into the witness protection program. Since it was mostly credit that was in the toilet, there was so little cash in circulation that the value of physical currency skyrocketed while the value of stuff plummeted. With so few coins and bills changing hands, communities leaned hard on old-fashioned barter, trading eggs, milk, or labor directly for goods because the cash to pay them just evaporated. It wasn't that there was no food, there was a massive food surplus, but nobody had the physical pennies required to purchase it. Families across the country were reduced to picking through the restaurant garbage and city dumps just to scrape together a meal, a grim and well-documented reality of the era. And this wasn't just an American problem. It was a domino effect that shattered the globe. In 1930, the U.S. passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, putting high taxes on foreign goods to try and protect American jobs. It backfired spectacularly. Dozens of countries got angry and passed retaliatory tariffs against the U.S., causing global trade to drop by a staggering 66%. It remains one of history's greatest lessons that we definitely never repeated. Which brings us back to our kitchen, where we are breaking hot dogs instead of eggs. It was christened Hoover Stew by the poor, the troubled, and anyone screwed by the system. It was the ultimate culinary insult served in a bowl. This dish was designed to stretch a single dollar to its absolute limit. The original recipe is incredibly grim. It was engineered by soup kitchens and highly stressed mothers to do exactly two things: feed people when you have nothing. Now, a little disclaimer here. I think the best way to describe this soup is to tell you the spirit of the dish. There are a ton of variations on the recipe, and it's not exactly like Hoovervilles published cookbooks. So the spirit of the dish is to make it as cheap as possible. I like to think of it like a game. You can literally throw anything you want in there. It's kind of like stone soup from the Civil War, but that's a story and a recipe for another day. So, after reading a bunch of different recipes, I settled on this. For the Chef Benny, as authentic as I can get it, 1930s version, you need one 16-ounce box of cheap elbow macaroni. I found mine on clearance. One package of standard hot dogs, 2 cans of stewed tomatoes, and 1 can of whole kernel corn or pinto beans. I did both. To build this soup, you're going to boil your macaroni in water until it's about al dente. Save some of that pasta water, about a cup, but strain the rest. And now that the pot's empty, you're going to season your hot dogs by simmering them on the bottom for a little bit. Then you're going to dump the canned tomatoes, the canned corn, and the pinto beans completely undrained. You're going to want every single drop of that sugary, starchy canning liquid because it forms the broth of your soup. You heard me. You bring that pot to a simmer just long enough to heat the meat through, and then you fold in your macaroni. There's no salt added, no pepper, no browning, and no seasoning. It is just a warm, slightly sweet, highly acidic, grayish pink pot of calories, daring you to finish it. All right, here we go. This is one that's been on my list for a while, doing some Hoover Stew. It looks okay. Let's give that a try. Here we go. Hoover Stew. It's like SpaghettiOs if mom left her at the bus stop at school and forgot to pick her up. It's okay. It's okay. It's not, like, the good news is it's not terrible. And if I was in a real tight spot, this would be a great dish. As you might have noticed earlier, this entire pot costs less than $10. And they could probably feed at least 12 people. So you see why soup kitchens really enjoy this. I've seen modern incarnations where they do things like use good sausage and all sorts of seasoning and, I don't know, what's the radical thing called an onion? But, like, the point of this is to kind of experience what it was like in Hooverville. I'm going to give this... Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I'll give this a 4 out of 10. It's not bad. It's just bland as hell. But, as you know, my vote is only half the battle. The real judges are my family. If they approve of our Great Depression ration, we have a legitimate piece of edible history on our hands. And if they don't, I'll be eating leftovers for at least 2 weeks while they order pizza. I'll post their final scores right down in the video description. When we look back at Hoover Stew, it's easy to focus on the grim reality of the 1930s, but there is a beautiful lesson hidden in these old pots. It proves that even when the economy is completely collapsed, American families refused to give up. They took the absolute bare minimum, they got resourceful, they used a little bit of humor to cope with the pain, and they made it work. And I think that's probably the most American I can get. Well, thanks for watching Reheated History. Stay curious, stay resourceful, and remember, you don't need a massive budget to make history taste incredible. Sometimes you just need a box of macaroni, a little science, and an absolute refusal to eat a boring dinner. See you next Sunday. It looks pretty tasty, so